As good as the Vikings were in 2024, the one thing that could never quite get consistent was a run game. So how do they fix that this offseason? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. Appreciate my hashtag every day or so very much. I'll make this thing go around. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. And today on the show, I want to address the run game. I want to deep dive the run game and what it is about the Vikings run game that I think doesn't work as well, what did work well, and what I think they could do to put a little bit more juice into it. There are a lot of different angles to go at this from, and I'm going to try to get to them all today. We could talk about personnel, who's in the wrong spot, replacing people, what to do with roster acquisitions in the offseason, which is the lion's share of what we see, so it's what we cover the most. But I think they can also make different decisions in training camp in August, make different decisions right now as they are preparing their plans for the 2025 Vikings and figuring out what they want to run, who they want to be. They could make some different decisions right now. They have the flexibility in this time of year to completely morph who they are and become more like the teams that could run it down people's throats all year. One option that they don't really have, or that I don't think they're going to try to have, is quarterback rushing. I don't know. I mean, J.J. McCarthy is not a slow quarterback by any means, but he's not as big as Josh Allen, and he doesn't exactly have that super dynamicism that you get from Caleb Williams or Lamar Jackson or whatever. Like, you're not going to see him juking guys out of his shoes. As a mobile quarterback, his escapability is actually awesome. I love his escapability, or at least I did in Michigan, and I liked what little I saw from him in a Vikings uniform so far. But that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking like designed quarterback runs. And I feel like if your QB isn't like 235 pounds or whatever the heck Josh Allen is, and he can't lower a shoulder, and like you're okay with him doing that because you know he's going to survive it because he's Josh Allen, I don't think the Vikings want to do that. And, it's different blocking schemes and stuff. So that's all part of installing. So that's not really an option, but it's something that they're going to have to work around. And hey, there are teams that run the ball well the Lions, they don't read option with Jared Goff, but hey, they, still had a plenty good run game. And actually the Lions are going to be a bit of an example here in how they did it, how Ben Johnson did it, got his way to a head coaching job. And of course, I would be remiss if I held them up as this like shining example of what you're supposed to be without mentioning, well, they had the best O-line in the league, at least in my opinion. Maybe Eagles fans will argue with me and they'd have a point. But elite offensive line, Jahmyr Gibbs doing great, Montgomery doing great when they had him. Like, that's part of it. I get it. And that's just not going to be the same as what the Vikings have. So one of the solutions here is, what if you just went big time all in, totally reconstructed the line? I've sort of hinted at it over the last couple of weeks of like, don't expect that. And the reason I say that is because I don't know. I feel like we should have learned over all the last years where we go, well, they're going to get a new guard and a new center and a new tackle, and they're going to get competition for the other tackle, and they're going to do this and that. And then they like give you one Josh Klein and like, that's it. And then like run back the rest of the group. I think every single offseason since Garrett Bradbury was drafted, we have had the question, hey, is this the year they're going to replace Garrett Bradbury? He's going into a contract year. I don't know if I see an extension for him in the future, but I don't know if like he might be an interesting cap casualty thing. Veterans in the last year of their deal are always interesting cap casualty ideas. But the Vikings don't exactly need to generate more cap space. They're one of the most cap rich teams in the league right now. So creating more needs when they already have so many problems on the defense feels a little bit like you're going the wrong direction. But with somebody like Bradbury, who definitely, okay, so the Bradbury story, if you're not familiar with where I've been at on Garrett Bradbury, when it was Zimmer, all of the Bradbury offenses, which were all Kubiak offenses, because they were either Kevin Stefanski with Gary Kubiak in his ear, Gary Kubiak himself, and then Clint Kubiak, right? So they were all the same offense. And they would have Garrett Bradbury reach a lot. They would do a lot of zone toss, a lot of very stretchy outside zone. This was very good for Dalvin Cook. And that meant that Garrett Bradbury, the Grim Reacher, had to get up and around a lot of guys. It meant that he had to do a lot of really difficult footwork. That kind of footwork, that kind of training also leaked into what he could do in pass pro and the way that they approached pass pro with him, and it caused some issues. But to me, my perception of that era was always that they are asking too much of this guy, that they ask him to be a superhero, understanding that he's going to take some L's doing that, but it's probably worth it. But then he would get graded on the same scale as somebody who's in like a power scheme and only ever down blocks, and it would look worse. But his job was harder. Well, with Kevin O'Connell, his job wasn't as hard, and he got better because his job got easier. Pretty much to be expected. And I think that, Kevin O'Connell probably came in and said, hey, we probably can't ask him to do this much. Let's ask him to do a little less. It'll be fine. And it pretty much has been. But the way to approach this is going to be a question of speed versus power, right? When you look at the players available, some are faster, some are bigger. If you have a big guy and a fast guy available, all right, go for it, right? And that's why Trey Smith's probably going to make a bunch of money, right? And if that's what you want to do, then go ahead. If you just want to throw this whole offseason an offensive line, sure. However, if you're one of those people that's like, we want a new guard, center, and everything, I'm going to start asking you questions what you're doing at corner. What are you doing at safety? What are you doing at QB alongside J.J. McCarthy? And all those other free agency questions we've been asking, right? So beyond just the generalities of how many players should they acquire, well, if they can find some good deals, they should go get those good deals. And I'm not going to say, well, they should get a guard, but not two guards, and they shouldn't get a center or whatever. Whatever happens, right? Some names, though, that are maybe worth watching. The big one is Trey Smith. He's the Chiefs' right guard right now. And he is like the big name guard. PFF has him making $20 million a year. If you want to spend $20 million a year on a guard, there's your guy. That's your name. I don't think that that's particularly efficient. And crucially, I would say that that's fine if he were uniquely a good player, like among this class. But this class is like Kevin Zeitler in it and like some other names that you're going to really like. Some older guys that won't be long-term deals, but they can paper over the thing while maybe a fifth round guard develops, or while somebody else kind of makes it up, figures it out, while you try to train somebody like Michael Juergens up a little bit, or even Walter Rouse if you want him to play a little guard. I know they experimented a little bit with that in camp this year, or last year. But that's one name. Again, Zeitler's another name. In the draft, there are two names that I'm like very familiar with. There's far from the only two names. But the two that I'm familiar with are Donovan Jackson, Ohio State, and Tyler Booker out of Alabama. I really like Tyler Booker. I have absolutely no issues with Donovan Jackson. I'm not done with Donovan Jackson. For Booker at 24, if the Vikings just slam-a-roni that, I'm doing fine with that. I'm absolutely, you won't hear a complaint out of me. As for Donovan Jackson, I think I expect to come to the same conclusion, but it's unfinished right now. So we'll put a pin in it until I can really confirm that. But so far, what I've seen totally works out. Footwork is there. The way he plays is pro style enough. His pass sets look right. And so both of those guys are very like not a lot of work to do out of the box kind of guards. So sure. If you want to spend your first round pick on a guard, go ahead and do it. But that means your first round pick is not going to a safety or a pass rusher, interior lineman or any of those other things. So you have to be aware of that. This is all about opportunity cost, right? They have a lot of money. They can fill a lot of needs, but they can't get the most expensive starter at all of them. So you can't daydream about everybody, but I do expect this to be a pretty active free agency, and I expect there to be some O-line help in there, and I think O-line help is coming in the draft as well. They just need to fill out the room, if nothing else. But to me, I'm sorry, this is the boring part of the conversation. This is not where I think you find like actionable solutions. We could just kind of say names that are on the free agency lists at each other all day long, but let's try to figure out exactly where the problem lies with the Vikings run game, and that gets a little more philosophical. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to play daily fantasy football. Here's how it works. You pick more than or less than on at least 2 players' projections, and if you are right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. They even have a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw 1 yard to win. So put that with one more pick. As long as you get it correct, bang, you're cashing out. We're all happy. Go check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie Winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. PrizePicks has been my favorite way to play daily fantasy all year long. I've been having so much fun with it. I've had a fantastic playoffs on PrizePicks, I will have you know. But even when it's not going well, it still gives me a fun way to just like have an extra something to look at, to pay attention to in a game that I otherwise wouldn't really care about. And I know for Vikings fans like Chiefs, Eagles, we don't really have a stake in this. This is not we don't have a dog in this fight. These guys aren't in our division. So give yourself a dog in this fight. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Locked On NFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you are done here, check me out on Locked On NFL, which you can find on Wednesdays in the mornings. You can find me with Tyler Rowland. We ranked head coaching hires. I have takes about Ben Johnson you may enjoy. And also, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL and check out any of the breakdowns I did all season long. Okay, let's get into what I want to talk about the run game, which is the philosophy. So the elephant in the room here is that if you want the run game to be better, they probably have to run it more. They ran it like 10 to 13 times a game. They passed 3, maybe even 4 times as much as they ran. If you are of the analytical mind, that might be optimal to you. And in fact, a lot of the like running backs don't matter, run game doesn't matter. You don't, the big discussion that happened 2020-ish, 2019-ish, where a lot of people were doing like big data bowl studies and stuff on whether or not the run game, like you needed to hashtag establish the run, and whether or not, a good run in the first quarter leads to better runs in the fourth quarter. And all of those studies basically came out with, there's not really a correlation. There's nothing really, that there's too many other things going on. And it's not really this measurable, this reliable thing that if you stick with the run game, it'll come around eventually. There's a ton of noise in those studies, right? So grain of salt. But I would say if you're going to be like of that mind, those studies didn't come away with the conclusion that you should never, ever, ever run the ball. You shouldn't pass the ball every single play, right? You still need a little. It's just that the definition of balance needs to be readjusted. And I think they landed on something like an 80-20 ratio. 80-20, 70-30, something like that. And that's about where the Vikings were. So make no mistake, I'm not necessarily calling for more volume, but I do think that the low volume is a symptom of what is like intrinsic to their problem, which is a lack of diversity. So I'll cue you into a project that I'm working on for Patreon and for Wide Left and a bigger thing, which is I want to learn the Lions. I want to learn the Lions run game and Ben Johnson's offense and stuff. He's still in the division. I'm going to have to cover him twice a year. So I'm trying to learn that. I have a Bobby Peters book, which is a great resource. I cannot recommend those enough. Hashtag not an ad. I just love them. And if you go just through the table of contents, I'm pretty sure you can see this just on the preview. You don't even need to buy the book if you don't want to. And in it, you have counter, power, duo, outside zone, strong, weak, inside zone, traps, long traps and short traps, crack toss, jet sweeps, a whole bunch of things. And if you compare it to, say, the 2021 Rams, where Kevin O'Connell came, which I also have the book for, and this was a godsend when learning Kevin O'Connell's scheme when he first got hired, there's some outside zone and some duo. And that's it. So the lack of diversity is different. It's a different kind of thing, right? Like there's way more diversity in the pass game when you look at the Rams one than there was with the Lions, and pros and cons, right? But I think the Lions run game works because the Lions run game is incredibly diverse. And I'm pretty sure I'm on safe ground. I think like O-line coaches would probably agree. If you can install 5-6 different families of run play, you have an answer for everybody and what their favorite front is and who their big guys, if they got a Jeffrey Simmons, or if they're a team that's more like a guy that has a Myles Garrett, whoever it is, you've got a plan that is good against that kind of guy. The Vikings are very much like the 2021 Rams, of course. They're some outside zone, some duo, some inside zone. That's about it. Yeah, there's a little bit of power sometimes. Like they run a little bit of gaps sometimes. It's mostly counter. But it's like as a counter punch. Like it's as kind of a specialty. It's as a change up, not as like a bread and butter. And the Lions had 5 different bread and butters. So how do you do that? How do you pull that off? Well, for one, you need your staff to be made of a whole bunch of really good teachers. This is why the Lions staff is getting poached like crazy, and the Vikings staff is not getting those jobs. I think a big reason is because the Lions staff, look at them, man. They installed so many different kinds of run plays. That's so hard to do in the limited practice time. It's genuinely an amazing feat. And the Vikings have preferred to go with simple and try to execute it well. Well, they're not executing it well enough. So again, you get to this crossroads. You either need to get better players in the building that are going to execute that well, and you need to be able to say, well, they know we're running duo all the time, but we're kicking their ass so that we can run duo all the time anyways, and it doesn't matter that they see it coming. Or you need to have more things to go at it, and you need to have more answers to certain fronts and stuff that gave the Vikings trouble, especially late in the season with the Lions and the Rams at the end. So let's say that the Vikings are capable of doing those installs, and the reason that they went for simplicity was, more part of a grander scheme or whatever. Let's say that they are going to try to do more of those concepts. The other thing is you need to have some rushing volume to get all those concepts done. Otherwise, you're going to run them all once a game. And then it's not worth all that practice time you spend on them. These are expensive installs in a finite resource, which is practice time. And if you're going to spend that much practice time, you're going to run them. So the Lions ran the ball a lot, and they got really good at it, and it worked. And I kind of hope that a lot of offenses try to do the same just so we can get back to a balanced thing and the NFL doesn't turn into a 7-on-7 league. But just for my own enjoyment. But I think there is merit to saying, okay, if we're going to be this, let's be this. Let's run counter, and then the next play we're going to run outside zone, and then the next play we're going to run inside zone, and then the next play we're going to run long trap. All of those require different footworks. They require different reads for the running backs and all kinds of different things. So who knows what is going to be a big part of it. But it makes you really adapt. Like the dividends are, it makes you adaptable. It makes you a little bit more resilient to injury. What if your really good zone center, what if your Garrett Bradbury gets hurt and your center now can't reach block? Well, if you're an only outside zone team, your center probably just sucks now. You just are going to have to put up with bad play from him all year long. But if you can say, okay, we're going to become a gap team, and everybody knows how to do it, and we're just going to ask this guy to down block, you can paper over that problem and not miss a beat. That resiliency is important, and I would honestly venture a guess that, and I didn't watch the run game nearly as closely this year, and maybe this is something to go back and look at, like in the true dog days of like June when nothing's going on, would be to look at how they played with Cam Robinson and with Dalton Reisner, how it was different when it was Ingram and Darisaw, and like how they changed their run calls, how those guys zone block, how those guys climbed the second level, how those guys, would those guys have been better players if the Vikings could have transitioned to being a GY counter team and play action stuff off of that and trap protections and everything else that goes on there? Could that have been a possible solution to the problems that they had with just the depth chart up front? Perhaps, right? But to do that, you can't just spend a bunch of time in camp installing counter and then never run it. That's just an inefficient use of that practice time resource, and everybody else is going to be using it more efficiently. You're putting yourself at a disadvantage. You have to be willing to run all of those things, and those plays will add up. Those calls will add up, and your run-pass ratio is not going to be nerd-friendly. You're going to have to just kind of deal with that. And even if that is an inefficiency, it might pay off in dividends elsewhere and, make you really good at holding a lead and all the other things that the run game is supposed to be for. So that's part of it. The other thing, we haven't even talked about the running back situation. The Vikings actually have a fairly dire running back situation in that they don't have any under contract except like Ty Chandler and I think one guy from the practice squad. So we got to talk about that. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. This episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes used to mean waiting around and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back and then waiting and wondering more. But now taxes means matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes for you as soon as today. That expert will give your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. That expert will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. The other thing we got to talk about here is the running back. I think adding diversity to the coaching tree, switching out who's on offensive line, those things are all very much things they should pursue. I don't think that they can be too extreme in one offseason. You can't switch out half of your offensive line in one offseason and then expect that group to be killing it year one. They at least need time to get together. And so maybe switching it out. Plus, it just dominates a lot of resources. So switching it out slowly is the deal. And I think the same thing with adding diversity, right? If you want to change your scheme entirely and a whole bunch of stuff, that's one thing. Or can we get a group of O-linemen together and add a little bit more trap this time? Maybe install that this time and you know, really quick refreshers on the outside zone rules. They know that. Let's add more things and continue to do it. That's the advantage of continuity. And I think when you go 14-3, you get the advantage of a lot of continuity. You're not firing like a lot of people. You're not getting whole new groups of people in here, right? But what about the dude actually carrying the rock? Where's Aaron Jones, right? I have come on the show plenty and said I'm in favor of bringing Aaron Jones back. I think that's a perfectly fine idea, but I also want to make it clear that that's not the only idea. If they let him walk, there are other guys that could be linked to the Vikings. There are guys like Najee Harris. Najee Harris is interesting in that Najee Harris is not an explosive back. And this, much to the frustration of Steelers fans, there would be holes. He would always kind of get caught. He would be really good at getting that 10-yard run. There is a place for that in your offense for sure. But as a first-round pick, that probably wasn't enough for them. And that's going to be a story I tell a lot when I talk about these draft running backs, because so many of these draft running backs are the same way. They are not necessarily explosive. They know what they're looking at. They have the vision, and they have the ability to choose the right hole, space themselves out. The footwork is right. But when they go screaming through that hole, they just get caught a lot because they just aren't going to be that quick through it. And if you're getting caught that much by college defenses and in college-sized holes, I mean, goodness gracious, you watch any of the playoff games, especially where there's actually some talent in the trenches on one side of the ball. NFL players versus non-NFL players, and you have these like chasms to run through, and then oh my God, look at Cam Scattaboo going for everything, I won't say that about Ashton Jonty though. I don't think there's a lot of NFL talent on that O-line right now. I'm sure I say that, and like I don't know who any of these guys are, and I'm not familiar. I know two of the guards, and I already talked about them in the first segment. So you're gonna say, wait, but there's this like guy that's supposed to be a first rounder at Boise State. I don't care. That O-line sucked, and he did a lot of cleanup. But he's an interesting option as well. I think as a Heisman candidate, he probably does go in the first round. And I think he is, as like a zone player, it'll have to be its own episode, I think. My thoughts on Ashton Jonty, and there'll be a Patreon on him as well. I think that's actually probably the next thing I do on Patreon is a Jonty breakdown. But the highlights for a guy like that aren't what tell me who he, like outrunning, random biology majors is not going to tell me who you are as an NFL player, right? Especially in the Mountain West. And taking advantage of, college level defensive mistakes that you will never see at the NFL level isn't what tells me who he is, right? Juking out a guy like, oh God, who's the Oregon defensive tackle? I want to say not Hampton. You know who I'm talking about. Number 55 on Oregon. That guy's going to be like in the first part of the first round, right? Juking that guy or, bursting past that guy. Okay. That's NFL talent. That tells me something, right? And the way that he approaches certain problems, it's a lot of stutter step and sit and take forever and kind of juke and jive your way around stuff. But a lot of it is, foot in the ground, get upfield, and then try to be bursting. He has that burst. But somebody like Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, I talked about this yesterday, doesn't necessarily have that. And so these holes in the NFL close up faster than they close up in college. And what I'm getting at is if you want a Najee Harris type, if you want a steady Eddie that's going to make responsible decisions and maximize, fall forward, get extra yards, be efficient. If you're after success rate, the back that you want is there for you. There are so many of them, and you probably don't have to spend a lot to get it. But if you want a little burst, if you want a little bit of explosiveness, the options get a lot more limited. And I genuinely think Aaron Jones might be the best one of those options available on free agency, unless you want to decide you're going to do the Jonty thing, or you're going to do. I love Travion Henderson out of Ohio State. I actually like him better than Jonty. I'll just sneak that one in there. I'll defend that take later, but that's something for you to chew on. But that is there's a couple of those, and then there's like 30 Alexander Madisons, and everywhere in free agency in the draft you can get an Alexander Madison wherever you want. And one of those Alexander Madisons is Najee Harris. Right? Najee Harris is a better Alexander Madison than Alexander Madison, but stylistically, you're making the same bargain where we're going to take consistency over explosiveness. I don't think that you got to solve it somehow, right? They've got like Ty Chandler and a Dream under contract right now. So it's got to be somebody, and that's a problem you have to solve. But I don't think that's where the run game gets fixed necessarily. I think you just want to prevent it from getting worse. And what better way to prevent something from getting worse than to sign the same guy? He'll be a year older and, that much more injury prone or whatever. So you have to deal with that. You have to have somebody else back there that you feel good about. Aaron Jones and a rookie. I love that idea, and I don't think that rookie needs to be a huge expenditure. But really, adding that diversity. And potentially that might mean that the run volume goes up a little bit. But if you get better at the run, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Either way, run plays are going to happen, even if you only call it 13 times a game. Well, that's 13 plays in a game. You can't have those be 2-yard, stinkers. And so whatever it is, the problem needs to get fixed. And it's going to be a combination of all of these things. You want to do a little bit better on the line. You want to do a little bit better at running back, or at least prevent that from getting worse. I don't think that room was bad this year. I loved the season Aaron Jones had. That's why I want to bring him back. And then I think schematically they can do more. I didn't even talk about formations and motions and taking more advantage of that stuff to try to spring things open. But that maybe will have to be a topic for another day. Either way, there are so many opportunities to fix the run game. There are also a lot of opportunities to miss a chance to fix the run game and maybe prioritize coverage a little bit more, prioritize, getting an interior pass rush a little bit more. So if it doesn't get fixed, maybe it's because they prioritize those other things and put in the same position. Maybe you would have done the same. That's totally valid. But these are the options available. These are the opportunities available. The levers are there if they want to pull them. I will talk to you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.